someone is deeply in love with you right now. And strangely enough, it all began because of something you did, or perhaps something you stopped doing. You need to listen to this message all the way through before you move on, because once you understand what has been happening beneath the surface, you may start seeing everything around you in a completely different way. This message did not appear in your life by simple mistake or random chance. It is not only a dramatic way of saying something. There is a reason you stopped here. There is a reason your attention stayed on these words instead of moving away like it normally might. Something inside you slowed down for a moment and quietly told you to keep listening. That feeling of being drawn toward this message may be connected to something very real that is happening inside another person's emotional world. There is someone connected to you, someone you know now or someone you once knew, who may be experiencing a very intense emotional state at this moment. And strangely, the center of those emotions is you. They are struggling not because you chased after them, not because you demanded too much from them, and not because you tried to force yourself into their life. In fact, the opposite may be true. Their emotions became stronger because you stopped doing something they had become accustomed to receiving from you. You stopped giving the same level of attention, care, patience, understanding, or emotional availability that they once believed would always be there. And that one quiet change created a reaction inside them that they never expected. There was a moment in your own life when you made a quiet decision to start choosing yourself. It may not have looked important from the outside. You may not have announced it to anyone. You may not have explained your reasons. You did not need to create an argument or make a dramatic scene. It was simply an internal shift. Something inside you became tired of giving more than you were receiving. You stopped overextending yourself for someone who was not meeting you halfway. You stopped explaining the same things again and again to someone who was not really trying to understand you. You stopped trying to solve every problem by yourself. You stopped carrying emotional responsibilities that were never supposed to belong entirely to you. You stopped feeling like it was your job to keep everything peaceful while your own feelings were being pushed aside. Little by little, you began pulling your energy back toward yourself, and without even planning it, you created distance. That distance was not created to take revenge. It was not created to punish someone. It was not designed to make another person suffer. You simply reached a point where you could no longer keep abandoning yourself just to make somebody else feel comfortable. You began to understand that loving someone should not require you to constantly disappear from your own life. You began to understand that patience has limits, that effort has to be mutual, and that emotional connection cannot survive forever when only one person is carrying it. And that is where everything began to change. The person on the other side never expected to see this version of you. They were familiar with the version of you who stayed, the version who explained, the version who adjusted, the version who waited, the version who forgave quickly, the version who made excuses for them when their actions did not match their words. They became comfortable believing that your presence was stable regardless of how they behaved. Somewhere in their mind, they believed your patience had no ending point. They believed that even if they delayed their effort, you would eventually understand. Even if they became distant, you would still care. Even if they made mistakes, you would still be there. Because of that belief, they did not take your emotional presence as seriously as they should have. They postponed effort. They delayed important conversations. They assumed there would always be another opportunity. They believed they could return later and find everything exactly as they left it. They thought time would not change anything between you. They thought you would remain emotionally available because you had always been that way before. But they were wrong. When you stopped overgiving, they slowly began to experience the absence of something they had quietly depended upon. At first, they may not have understood what was happening. They might have thought you were simply busy. They may have assumed you were distracted by your own life. They may have even told themselves that nothing had really changed. Perhaps they expected you to return to your old behavior after a little time. But the longer your silence continued, the more noticeable it became. At first, the absence felt like simple space. Then it started feeling like silence. And eventually, that silence became louder than words ever were. This is where their emotional confusion may have started. Because when someone becomes accustomed to having access to another person's attention and suddenly that access disappears, the mind begins searching for an explanation. They start thinking about you more often than they expected. They replay old conversations in their head. They remember small moments that once seemed ordinary. They remember the patience you showed. They remember the way you listened. They remember the small details they once ignored. They remember how you noticed things other people overlooked. They remember how you could understand their mood without them having to explain everything. Things they once ignored suddenly become meaningful. They may remember a simple message from you. They may remember a conversation that seemed insignificant at the time. They may remember your reaction when they were struggling. They may remember how you encouraged them when they doubted themselves. They may even remember moments when you were there for them while they were not equally present for you. And this is one of the strange things about emotional attachment. Sometimes, people do not understand the importance of a connection while they are receiving it every day. Familiarity can make something valuable feel ordinary. When the connection is always available, the mind may stop noticing how much comfort it provides. But when that comfort disappears, awareness begins to rise. Suddenly, they begin noticing what is missing. They begin asking themselves why they did not appreciate you more. Why did they assume you would always stay? Why did they take your kindness for granted? Why did they believe your patience would continue forever? Why did they keep delaying the things they knew they needed to say or do? Those questions can become especially strong when everything around them becomes quiet. At night, when distractions disappear, thoughts have more room to speak. They may lie in bed and think about you. They may pick up their phone and scroll through old conversations. They may pause when they see your name. They may open your profile and stare for a moment before closing it. They may begin writing a message and then delete it because they do not know how you will respond. They might even tell themselves that they are not going to reach out. Then, a few hours later, they think about you again. Outwardly, they may appear completely normal. They may talk to friends, they may go to work, they may laugh, socialize, and continue their normal routine. If someone asked them whether anything was wrong, they might simply say that everything is fine. But internally, things may feel very different because your absence is no longer only physical, it has become emotional. You were not simply someone they talked to. You were someone who made them feel understood. You noticed parts of them that they did not easily show other people. You recognized changes in their mood. You could sense when something was wrong even when they said nothing. You gave them a type of emotional attention that they may not have realized was rare. And when someone loses that kind of presence, they do not only miss the person, they can also miss the version of themselves they experienced around that person. They may miss feeling understood. They may miss feeling accepted. They may miss the comfort of knowing that someone genuinely cared. They may miss the feeling that they could speak without being judged. They may miss the emotional safety they once received from you. That is why their reaction can become confusing even to themselves. There is a psychological truth behind this. People do not always recognize the full value of something while it is constantly available. Sometimes awareness becomes stronger only after access is reduced. It is not necessarily because the value suddenly increased. The value was already there. What changed was their ability to ignore it. Your absence may have removed something they had become used to receiving without thinking about it. You were an emotional mirror for them. You reflected understanding, attention, patience, and care. You made them feel noticed. You gave them a place where certain emotions could exist without being immediately rejected. And now that reflection is no longer available in the same way. They are being forced to sit with themselves. That can be uncomfortable. At first, they may try to avoid those feelings. They may become busier. They may spend more time with friends. They may throw themselves into work. They may start conversations with other people just to keep their mind occupied. They may even convince themselves that they have completely moved on. But distractions only work for a certain amount of time. Eventually, the mind returns to what it has been avoiding. And when those thoughts return, they often come with comparison. They may talk to other people and notice that the conversations do not feel the same. They may meet someone new and realize that the emotional connection is not as natural. They may try to replace the comfort they once experienced with you, only to discover that another person cannot simply reproduce the same history, understanding, and emotional familiarity. They may begin comparing small things without even realizing it. The way someone listens, the way someone responds, the way someone remembers details, the way someone makes them feel. And slowly, they may understand that what they had with you was more meaningful than they originally admitted. This can create a difficult emotional conflict. One part of them may want to come closer to you. Another part may be afraid of rejection. One part may miss you deeply. Another part may be protecting their pride. One part may want to admit that they made mistakes. Another part may refuse to accept that they were responsible for creating the distance. So they remain caught between longing and resistance. They may wonder if you still think about them. They may wonder whether you have moved on. They may wonder whether someone else has entered your life. They may wonder if you still care about them at all. And the hardest question may be this: what if I waited too long? That question can become powerful because your behavior has changed. You are no longer standing in the same place emotionally. You are no longer trying to convince them. You are no longer begging for clarity. You are no longer sending endless messages to keep the connection alive. You have become quieter. And sometimes, quietness communicates more than a long explanation ever could. When you stop chasing, the other person has space to experience their own feelings. When you stop explaining, they have to think about what they did. When you stop fixing everything, they have to recognize what was being held together by your effort. That is why your change may have affected them more deeply than you realize. It is not necessarily about manipulation or playing games. It is about the natural emotional impact of losing something that was once familiar. Your decision to focus on yourself changed the emotional balance between you. They can no longer assume that you will always be there whenever they decide they want your attention. And that uncertainty can make someone finally pay attention. They may start wondering what is happening in your world. They may become curious about what you are doing. They may notice that you seem calmer. They may notice that you are not reacting the way you once did. They may wonder whether your heart is finally letting go. And that possibility can awaken emotions they kept hidden, because there is a difference between having someone available and realizing that you could actually lose them. When you were always there, they could delay their decision. They could postpone the conversation. They could tell themselves there was plenty of time. But when your energy changed, the illusion of unlimited time disappeared. Suddenly, the connection feels more real. They may begin thinking about everything they should have said. They may remember moments when they could have treated you differently. They may remember opportunities they ignored. They may replay situations and imagine how things could have gone if they had been more honest, more present, or more emotionally mature. This is where regret can begin. Regret does not always arrive loudly. Sometimes it arrives in small moments. A song reminds them of you. A familiar place brings back a memory. Someone says something that sounds like you. They see something you once talked about. A certain time of day reminds them of when you used to communicate. And suddenly, there you are in their mind again. They may not tell anyone about these moments, but they feel them. They may even try to convince themselves that these memories mean nothing. They may say they are only remembering the past. They may try to push the thought away. But the more they fight an emotion, the more attention they sometimes give it. This can create a cycle. They think about you, push the thought away, remember another moment, feel the absence, become curious, check their phone, stop themselves from reaching out, and then think about you again. The cycle can continue because the emotional question has never truly been answered. That is why someone who once appeared emotionally distant can suddenly seem deeply affected by your absence. It may not mean their feelings were created overnight. It may mean those feelings were already present, but were buried beneath comfort, routine, fear, pride, or emotional avoidance. Your change simply made those feelings harder to ignore. And there is something else you need to understand. The most powerful thing you did may not have been walking away. It may have been becoming emotionally independent from their response. You stopped measuring your worth by whether they noticed you. You stopped needing their approval to feel valuable. You stopped believing that you had to constantly prove your love in order to deserve love in return. That internal shift changes the way another person experiences you. Before, they may have felt certain that you would continue reaching toward them. Now, they may sense that you are capable of moving forward without them. That realization can create a completely different emotional reaction. They may suddenly understand that your presence was a choice. You were not there because you had no other option. You were there because you cared. And when you stopped giving endlessly, they may have realized that your love was never something they were entitled to. This realization can be painful. It can also be awakening. They may begin asking themselves whether they still have a chance with you. They may wonder if they should finally speak honestly. They may imagine what would happen if they contacted you. They may picture your response. They may fear that you will be cold. They may fear that you will ignore them. They may fear that you have already healed from what happened, and that fear can become stronger than the fear of admitting their feelings. Because sometimes, a person does not realize how deeply they care until the possibility of losing the connection becomes real. This is why they may be experiencing so much internal conflict right now. They may want to reach out, but pride holds them back. They may want to apologize, but embarrassment stops them. They may want to explain themselves, but they do not know where to begin. They may want to tell you they miss you, but they are afraid of hearing that you no longer feel the same. So instead of acting, they think, they remember, they question, they replay, they imagine. And the longer they remain in that emotional space, the more obvious the truth may become to them. They care more than they wanted to admit. They miss you more than they expected. And the silence they once thought would make things easier may actually be making them face everything they avoided. If you have been wondering why the energy around this connection feels different, understand that change does not always happen through visible action. Sometimes the biggest emotional shifts happen silently. Someone can be completely still on the outside while experiencing a storm of thoughts internally. You may not see their struggle. You may not know how many times they have thought about contacting you. You may not know how often they replay old moments. You may not know what they feel when your name appears somewhere unexpectedly. But their silence does not automatically mean the absence of emotion. Sometimes silence is where emotion becomes strongest. And this is why you should not rush back into the old pattern simply because you feel their energy or sense that they are thinking about you. Your growth matters too. If someone truly wants to return to your life, let their actions speak. Let them show effort. Let them communicate clearly. Let them demonstrate that they understand what went wrong. You do not have to carry the entire connection again. You have already learned what happens when you give too much while receiving too little. You have already experienced what it feels like to keep waiting. You have already learned that love without balance can become exhausting. So if this person is genuinely coming back emotionally, you do not need to chase that process. Let them meet you where you are now. The version of you that exists today is not the same version of you they once knew. You have learned to protect your peace. You have learned to value your own time. You have learned that silence can sometimes be healthier than endless explanations. And that may be exactly what they are beginning to notice. They may be realizing that you were not difficult to love. You were simply tired of being the only one trying. They may be realizing that you were not asking for too much. You were asking for consistency. You were not demanding perfection. You were asking for honesty. You were not trying to control them. You were asking to be valued. And now that you have stopped asking, they may finally understand what those requests actually meant. That is the emotional shift happening beneath the surface. Someone who once felt certain that you would always be available may now be uncertain about their place in your life. Someone who once assumed your feelings would never change may now wonder whether they have lost their opportunity. And that uncertainty can awaken love, regret, longing, and self-reflection all at once. So if you have recently felt strangely connected to this person, if memories have appeared unexpectedly, or if you have noticed that your own emotions seem to be shifting, do not immediately assume that you have to act. Sometimes the purpose of a connection is not to make you chase harder. Sometimes it is to teach you when to stop chasing. Sometimes the most important thing you can do for a relationship is to stop carrying it alone. And sometimes, when you finally release the need to control what another person does, they are given the space to understand what they actually feel. That is what your silence may have created. Space. Space for them to think. Space for them to remember. Space for them to compare. Space for them to regret. Space for them to recognize your value. And perhaps most importantly, space for them to finally confront the feelings they had been avoiding. So do not underestimate the change you made when you decided to put yourself first. You may have thought you were simply protecting your peace. You may have believed you were simply moving forward. You may have thought you were finally letting go. But from their side, your absence may have become a mirror. A mirror showing them what they took for granted. A mirror showing them what your presence gave them. A mirror showing them how different life